Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the summer series here at CF. Joined by Chris Williams again.
Good to be here.
Welcome back.
Thank you. No, it's good to be back. I appreciate you and Bloom holding down the fort on the last one.
Yeah, it was a good time. I'd never podcasted with him.
Well, I mean, maybe that can be. Maybe we can get Bloom like locked in on the wrestling.
Get him in here. That'd be
I don't know. Bloom's like the farthest guy from a wrestling guy.
I feel like you're somehow making fun of his physical stature.
I'm not making fun of his physical stature. It's more of his mental capacity. Bloom's going to be one of those people because I've taken him to dirt races.
Yeah.
And the dirt racing crowd, as I've told you a million times, is a lot like the wrestling crowd. Not everybody fits in with our type.
We're just kind of crazy.
Yeah, kind of nuts. It's good to be here. Presented as always by our friends at the Ivy College of Business. They are kind of the inspiration as to what we're doing here with this particular summer series, where we're talking about the business of not just college athletics, but really how it impacts Iowa State. And we've been partners with the Ivy College of Business for a couple of years now, and just they're awesome people. And I want to first of all congratulate my buddy Mr. Dean Spalding on his incoming retirement. That's after the year, but also really promote that Ivy MBA. It's affordable, it's flexible. They give you options to learn in person, online. You can contact the Ivy College of Business at Iowa State at 515-294-8118. Or hey, if you have questions, send them an email right here. I've got an email address for you guys. You could type this thing out. You can send them any questions that you may have and get a personal response at busgrad@iastate.edu. busgrad@iastate.edu. Fun one today. I like these topics today that we have for us.
I'm excited because I feel like you truly are, you're a veteran to the industry.
Huh.
You're
might calling me old.
You might look like you're only 28 years old, but
stop it.
You got a wealth of knowledge.
Now you're sucking up to me. I certainly don't. I wish I looked like I was 28 years old. No, I kind of wanted to go back and do what I think. These are all very objective. These are very subjective.
Okay.
But what I think are the 5 biggest business stories that I've seen while covering Iowa State that impacted Iowa State to be the spot that it is now. And I'm guessing a few of these are going to be quite foreign to you because of your age.
But that's fun, right? And because I didn't grow up in Iowa, and I mean, I really wasn't introduced to Iowa State athletics until 2013, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, and really the majority of this stuff is before then.
Right.
Because I think that a lot of people like your age and Aiden age, you guys grew up in this era where sold out football stadiums and kind of like you were starting to see the fruits of some of the labor.
Yeah.
But a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about here was stuff that happened to kind of set up a guy like Matt Campbell to be able to have some success and all that good stuff.
Yeah. No, it's going to be fun. Chris is going to take us down memory lane of, like you said, those biggest stories you've covered. And the first one on your list is Jamie Pollard being hired.
Yeah. And, what's funny about this is Jamie and I always, we joke about this often, but we got here at the exact same time.
Yeah.
He was the first caller on my first radio show. He called in just to wish me and Bloom luck, which was super cool. Always
really nice.
Always remember that. And then I'm pretty sure I was the first media member to do like a sit down interview with him as athletic director. So he comes in after, a very tumultuous time when Larry Eustace, that whole deal.
Yep.
I mean, I don't need to get into all that, but Pollard comes in and really, Aiden, can you pull up the exact date Jamie Pollard got the job just for the
September 19th, 2005.
Okay, 2005. Yep. So I had actually been there a little bit, about a year before Jamie got there. But this guy comes in and he's just so brash. Like he's gotten more brash over the years.
I was going to say, what's he like compared to when he first started?
He's starting to be now he's so established and he's kind of the old guy in the room now. I can say that in a laughing matter, but he'll
Yeah.
just say what he thinks. But Jamie, I thought instilled, two main things that Iowa State needed. One was, they needed a fiscal leader.
Yeah.
The athletic department was in shambles financially before him. They had just cut baseball, that there's stories I've heard of they would literally like keep the lights off as long as possible
Oh,
in the
wow.
Jacobson to save money on electric bills. I mean, this was
That's
a bad
Yeah.
spot, and you didn't have the inflow of, season ticket sales that you have now. You didn't have the media rights dollars that you had now. And Iowa State was just a lot smaller there. But Pollard, to me, was the first person at Iowa State, and there have been many after him to do this, Matt Campbell specifically. But Jamie was kind of like, hey, we're not going to just settle for being just because Iowa State used to be this way doesn't mean it has to be in the future. And he gave everybody a vision, I thought, coming in from Wisconsin. And he had been the protege of the great Barry Alvarez for a really long time there, and saw really Wisconsin was one of the best athletic departments in the country, still is.
Mm-hmm.
And bringing that to Iowa State, and just the fact that he's still here, that's what Iowa State needed. And I listen, I get it. Like, Pollard will go out and say stuff that people disagree with. I love it. Even if I don't disagree with him, I love the fact that this guy will just say what he thinks. And there's no doubt in my mind that I truly believe he's probably the most influential figure in the history of Iowa State athletics, just because of that vision when Iowa State desperately needed one.
I feel like Pollard's brain is one of those where he kind of sees what everybody else doesn't. So when people get really mad at him because he makes certain decision, in the long run, you'll end up realizing why.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and he's looking 5 years down the road,
right,
more often than not.
Mm-hmm.
It's like this Sci-Town thing, like
right.
The last couple of years. I mean, it's gotten a ton of criticism. Oh, what do you need a hotel for? What do you need? Well, it's a revenue thing, and he saw what was happening here with the Big
Right.
Ten and the SEC and that money, and like that Iowa State was going to have a deficit, and they need to find a way to, make up for that, an
Mhm.
alternative way of income. And
Yeah.
that's the whole goal behind this. So I get it. You like your parking spot, and I'm sorry,
I was gonna bring up the parking.
but I truly believe that, like it or not, and there's gonna be a lot of pushback to this, but this is pro sports,
Yeah.
and it's either it's an evolve or die world, and Iowa State under his tutelage is evolved more often than not.
Yeah.
I think his challenge will be in the NIL world, because he's pretty old school when it comes to that stuff. Does Jamie jump on that train the way? And I'm guessing he will.
I guess, do you have a choice?
You don't. Yeah. I think if it were up to me, this would be, hey, you get a scholarship, you get free room and board. This is a pretty good deal. But we all know that, like, because the courts have decided and public opinion has decided that that's not fair to the athletes. So,
Mhm.
how do you make up for it?
So looking back at the story itself of Jamie Pollard being hired, you were still pretty early on in your career.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, looking back, you said you're pretty sure you're the first person that got that sit down with him. Did you feel the weight of, how big this hire was? Or were
No.
you kind of in that mentality of, I'm just a kid, I'm getting it?
I had no idea. No, I didn't think of myself as a kid. I was way too cocky for that. He was just a guy to me.
Yeah.
You got to realize the internet wasn't as mature either. Like, we had been around, like, when I say we, like, I mean the internet, but like,
Yeah.
there weren't like books that you could read on this associate athletics director coming from Wisconsin. Like, he was pretty unknown. But what he did do is, and that I specifically remember sitting there in that interview with him, and him laying out the Director's Cup and how, important it was for him to have like a really deep athletic department, and not, and they've done that, right? Like, they've gotten a lot better across the board in all sports. I remember I remember his vision for what he wanted football to eventually be, and Iowa State's there. Because the idea that Iowa State is going to consistently be a 10-11 win football team is crazy. Like this is not going to happen. But he wanted to build it like Wisconsin, where it's like your down years are 5-6 wins, where you're still going to a bowl game. And I had no idea. I didn't think too that we would both still be here.
Yeah,
is the biggest thing, and it's cool. I always say, like, I don't know if I have the energy to start with a new administration, so I hope Jamie stays at Iowa State until he's 80.
Just dies here.
Yeah, just keep going, brother.
I did a sit down with Jamie once. Did you know that?
I didn't. Was that for wrestling?
Yeah, it was very early on in my career. It was like Dresser won a Coach of the Year award. I can't remember which one it was, and somehow I found a way to get in there. Like, I went into his office and we sat on the couch.
He's very good at that too.
Oh yeah, I was actually surprised, just because I thought I might get him maybe on the phone, but no, I got to go to his office.
Jamie still is one of the hardest people to interview, I think.
Yes. I think in a way, yes, I agree.
Because he's thinking past your question.
I was going to say, his gears are turning.
Yeah,
you can see it in his face when he's doing it.
It's a compliment to him.
Yeah. But it's kind of exactly what we're saying and the type of person he is. Because it was all about him hiring Dresser, and he made like a very clear, like, the biggest, like he said, the best quality about Dresser wasn't what he could produce on the mat. It was his marketing skills, and he's not wrong. That's been very valuable.
It had to be too early in Pollard's career. I'm sure you've heard about it, but like, they're putting billboards up in Iowa City, and they're doing all these like just crazy.
Yeah.
I'll never forget the first like ad campaign they have, where it was like Jamie on this commercial going, "I chose Iowa State," and then it was Greg McDermott, "I chose Iowa State." And again, they were trying to reinforce the fact that this isn't some second fiddle place. And he's been successful with that for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. As far as that story, is there anything?
Well, to me, that story leads into the next one.
I was saying, are we ready to segue?
Well, it took some big kahunas to do what he did next,
which is letting Dan McCarney go.
Yeah, and this was super controversial.
Look at that headset.
Yeah, it's just pretty awesome here. That's good stuff. If you're listening on the podcast, I'm trying to reinforce that YouTube is now a spot where you can also view our podcast, and Aiden's doing a great job of pulling up photos and stuff like that as we go along. The last year, so 2005 football is kind of like it was the one that got away.
Yeah. That
was, in my opinion, the best Dan McCarney football team. Didn't have the best record. Maybe it did actually. It was like 7-5, or they were that game was just full of that season was full of missed opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
They were a 7-5 team that probably should have won 10 games at least and played for a Big 12 championship. So everybody's still feeling pretty good. Go to a bowl game, do all that good stuff. Iowa State at this point hasn't done much of that in the history of its sport. Dan McCarney wins your first bowl game. Like, he built Iowa State football. Dan McCarney is the reason why, Paul Rhodes and Matt Campbell were able to come, because he built that structure for everybody else to kind of grow.
Yeah.
He really struggles in 2006. And the thing about the Mac era at the end was it never felt sustainable from what I remember.
Yeah. It
just felt like, okay, well, we're going to build up for this year, and hopefully all this stuff will come together and we'll be good. And then, it's going to be, transfers weren't a thing back then, right? Like this. So it's like whoever you get, and then you develop them and whatever. So Aiden, find us the date Dan McCarney gets let go, just for the sake of record here.
I think it was 2006.
It was 2006. Just the official date. And that was just a massive move, because you have this entire generation where Dan McCarney built this thing, not even the wins, but Troy Davis and Seneca Wallace and these iconic players. To move on from him, we all fear change as humans. And now, like, our icon, our godfather who built this thing is now gone. And like, who else would want to come here? And that's what started everything, though. Like, if Pollard doesn't make the move to fire Dan McCarney, I mean, I don't know what happens, but I know that there's probably not going to be growth after that.
So as far as like covering the team, like were fans in a place where they were like, yeah, that needs to happen?
I would say there were definitely MAC people. I would say the crowd spoke for itself, though.
Okay.
In 2005, it was 2004, excuse me. They had to beat Missouri to play for the Big 12 championship game to win the to win the Big 12 North.
Mm-hmm.
And like, it was Thanksgiving weekend and like 30,000 people showed up, which is terrible.
Yeah.
You know, even for back then where you didn't have the crowds that you do now on it. But like, to me, there was just this fatigue.
Yeah.
Where, you know, I think many people thought that they probably weren't ever going to be better. And I was in that camp.
Yeah.
But again, I was pretty young and dumb back then, but I was in the camp of like, and a lot of my friends were on those teams, right? But like, you just didn't feel like this thing that there was much gas left in that tank. They had started to have, you know, it appeared to be with recruiting, they were starting to miss on more guys. There were more arrests and that type of thing where it just didn't feel as sustainable. And so for Pollard to pull the trigger then was just a big move. But again, I thought the crowd made it easy on him, though.
Yeah.
I thought the fans made that decision for him. There were still 30-40% of Iowa State fans that were firmly behind Dan McCarney.
Okay.
But the younger ones like me and like the loud ones were starting to push him out.
Okay.
And Dan and I, we had a heated relationship there for a few years. He thought I was this young punk that, but we're all good now and all that stuff. But yeah, it was a tumultuous time because you kind of had to pick a side there for a little bit.
Would I have liked you? Like if we were peers?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I hope so.
I mean, I'm just curious.
I wasn't a jerk.
You just had a big ego. Just felt really confident.
I don't think I outwardly showed that, but I thought I was smarter than I was.
I feel like you almost have to, though.
Well, yeah, because if you don't, you're going to get eaten alive.
Right. Like
in this field.
Yeah, I still feel like that's true today.
If you're passive in this field, like people sense it and they will eat you alive.
Yeah. Like I think there's room as a reporter to be able to admit like, hey, I'm learning.
Yeah.
Because I had to do that. Like I was
Yeah,
fresh.
don't be cocky, but be
but
confident.
I still had to have that.
The biggest thing is you just have to know your topic.
Right.
And like at that point, I knew my topic, but I had no perspective. Okay. I had no perspective on, at that time, what Dan McCarney meant to this institution.
Yeah.
I knew what I was watching, and I knew football to a point, not to the level that I should have. But I guess like I didn't know the stories of Dan McCarney going to frat houses on Thursday nights and giving away free tickets, begging them to come to the game. That type of stuff.
That's insane. Can you imagine Matt Campbell doing that?
No.
That's crazy.
No, I can't imagine any coach in 2024 doing that.
Yeah.
Nothing against Matt. Matt does his own stuff to foster that, but I could see Dresser doing it, I guess.
I could see him hitting the student lots on a game day and being like, "Hey guys,
absolutely,
come to the duel on Sunday.
Come to the duel." Yeah.
Aiden, you should pull up that quote again. He pulled up a quote of what Jamie Pollard said after letting him go. He said, Iowa State's football program has to be healthy for us to have any chance to compete in the Big 12. If football isn't healthy, we get stuck. This one's different. This one hurts. Yeah,
and he knew. I mean, that quote right there tells you he knew how beloved Dan McCarney was.
Yeah.
So again, like to make that move when he did it, it wasn't like, oh, they had been bad for 4 years in a row.
Yeah.
I mean, that 2006 team had talent. It was evident. And I covered recruiting at the time. Okay. So I was a recruiting reporter for scout.com at this time.
So you didn't even really touch it.
I mean, yeah, I was starting to, at that point, I was starting to commentate on anything and everything, unfortunately. But like, I was a recruiting guy, but the recruiting was falling off.
Right.
And that was the one thing I knew at that time. And it was they were really because they had this stretch right before that got everybody. They had beaten Iowa 5 years in a row. They're getting Meyer, they're getting Blythe, they're getting all the best players in the state of Iowa, and then that really started to fall off. And then you saw Iowa start to peak right after that, after McCarney's downfall.
Okay. And when you're covering something like this, like, did you know that it was coming?
Yeah, I mean, I just remember, so Bloom and I did a Sunday talk show
Okay.
then, and that was all we talked about that whole year.
Okay.
And Bloom, I want to say, was, this historical Iowa State, like,
Yeah.
I want to say Bloom was very much like, keep him.
Oh, okay.
I think if I'm remembering correct, I think Brent was probably commentating with his heart more than his head at the time. But what was crazy about that too is we were in college and we had this show, and that show from 9 to noon on KASI was like appointment radio. Like, people that time slot, like, it was the first reaction to the games.
Yeah.
Because nobody had a podcast. Nobody was. It was the first commentary you got after that game. So we would have. I remember, like, coaches would be listening, and we would get, everything we said was highly scrutinized.
You've come full circle.
We were not ready for that either, but we didn't get paid for it either. We volunteered, but it was great experience.
You know what's crazy about Bloom, and this is kind of a side note, I feel like in his time as he's evolved in Iowa State athletics, now he's, at the collective, I feel like I forget just how emotional Bloom is under the surface about Iowa State athletics.
Very much.
How much he cares about it, how invested he is.
Yeah.
Just because he's money bags over here.
Yeah.
So I forget that.
Man.
I forget that. And
no, and he had connections to Barney Cotton, I know, who was the offensive coordinator there. His dad's friends with him. Like, Bloom was connected even back then. And I lived with players, and it was really my best friend was on the team. Like, it was, what a time. But yeah, I mean, that's a bold move. And the old timers listening, really anybody 35 and up will remember that and how big of a deal that was. It would have been. And this is really before their social media doesn't exist at this point.
Right.
So think about it that way. And then he brings in Gene Chizik, which was this giant splash. Chizik's one of the top free agents in all of college football at the time. And he chose Iowa State, which was a huge coup at the time for Pollard to be able to land him. Even though it didn't really work out, still it felt like it put Iowa State on the map.
Yeah. What would you say was like your favorite part about covering the Dan McCarney era?
Dan, in general, like he just was such a guy who he's throwback. He'll tell you, him, like the Leach era, these coaches that actually answer your question. They, and I tell this all the time, we did this to ourselves, us being the media, when we pull. When a coach will talk for 40 minutes and we pull a 15-second clip and post it on Twitter, when maybe it's like the worst, like with no context at all.
Yeah.
No wonder they don't talk. And Dan would just this infectious energy. His players loved him. He has this uncanny ability to remember everybody's name. He genuinely will look you in the eye and have a conversation with you. Like, he was just incredible.
I mean,
I love him.
This past season, he was on the sideline with the Red Solo Cup.
Oh, he's the man.
Enjoying the Jack Trice Legacy game.
And he's the man. I love him to death. He's what a blessing it was to be able to get to know him in that sense. And got cussed out by him a couple times, but I was a better man for it.
I feel like if anyone could handle those days, it's you.
I learned a lot. I really did. I learned a lot, and he would be hard on me, but then it would always be like, give me a hug a couple weeks later.
Yeah.
That time. And I remember too how much I appreciated him. It was the first time I ever interviewed Gene Chizik, and the difference in that compared to Dan McCarney, it was like, holy shit, this is a whole different thing.
Yeah.
This is a totally different. I mean, Chizik couldn't get me out of his office fast enough. Where Dan quite certain would be like, hey, you want a beer? Like he was the best.
Yeah. I will say we are spoiled, and I say we as in like my age group of reporters, because like all I've known is Dresser, and like some of those football reporters, like the Daily kids who keep advancing and moving on and getting full-time jobs, all they know is Campbell. Like, we're very lucky to consistently cover like the same coaches year after year.
Pretty rare.
Yeah. Like
You know,
I
pretty
have,
rare.
I've truly never covered any
But
other
that's
coaches.
because you've had the same athletic director for 20 years, you
Mhm.
know, because these ADs come in and they want their own people
Yeah.
and, you know, the stability at the top. Like I truly, again, Jamie is open to criticism. Like I am not telling you he's untouchable. You can think whatever you want.
Yeah.
But Iowa State drastically needed that stability at the top
Mhm.
at that particular point in time. And that's what he's provided. But there's no bigger move he made than letting Dan McCarney go when he did.
Yeah. So changing gears from football.
Yes.
We're looking at basketball now. Greg McDermott takes the job at Creighton.
Yeah.
Say that right?
So
Say it
yeah,
wrong.
you did. So little backstory: Wayne Morgan's the head coach. Wayne Morgan replaces Larry Eustachy. Wayne was on Larry's staff. Greg is another hot free agent in the game. Okay, massive deal to be able to get him from Northern Iowa.
Mhm.
Again, there's so many of these. He could have gone to multiple jobs throughout the country, and he chooses to go to Iowa State, and it's not working. Okay, and he's a great coach. He's won everywhere in his career, big,
Yeah.
but at Iowa State, and it's not working. They're trying everything. They have talent. They're putting guys into the NBA. They're just across the board. It ain't working. Well, the problem was that Pollard had, and probably a misstep by Jamie, had given Greg a second long-term contract because Jamie at the time is showing support for his guy.
Okay.
I think what he's doing at the time is Jamie's trying to show the fans, like, I still have faith in this guy. You guys should too.
Mhm.
So he gives them this long-term deal. Well, there was a season in there where everybody thought Iowa State's going to peak. It's Lucas Steiger, it's Craig Brackens, it's Deontay Garrett. There's a kid named Chris Colvin that comes in from Chicago who's highly touted. You've got Otzelberger, D-Rob, like I'm trying to name off. You got this great young coaching staff that's just bringing in players, but they can't freaking win.
Yeah.
NBA guys across the board. Wes Johnson, Mike Taylor, Deontay Garrett, Craig Brackens. These are legit players, but they cannot find a way to win. And so basically, we go into the offseason, and McDermott's going to revamp everything. He brings in Nick Nurse, who's now an NBA champion head coach. Nick Nurse is on his staff for 2 weeks. Got paid for an entire year for 2 weeks of work. And out of nowhere, from the heavens, Creighton, Dana Altman leaves Creighton, goes to Oregon. They target Greg McDermott. Keep in mind, Creighton's in the Missouri Valley at this time. They're not in the Big East. And Greg McDermott is a no-brainer with the success that he had at Northern Iowa it's not, at the time, it's kind of dropping down a level, but I never viewed Creighton as much of a drop down. Like I'm from Western Iowa. Creighton basketball has always been a big deal in my life. We watched Creighton, Altman. It didn't feel like those days you were watching mid-major basketball, but it's a no-brainer for Mac to get out of that situation, to go back to a spot in the Missouri Valley where he knew he could coach.
Yeah.
And he knew you have to suck to not win at Creighton with all the money they have with the doctors. And it's the only big sport there is basketball and women's basketball. And they play some baseball too, but there's no football to worry about. It's a no-brainer. And what it does is it bails Pollard out of this contract. It gets Iowa State out of this lock that they would have never been able to afford to buy him out of. And again, could Greg have turned it around? Maybe, because he brings in Nurse. Otzelberger's still there, recruiting like crazy. The talent wasn't ever the problem, but they couldn't really piece it together. And it just felt broken from the start. They get bailed out because Greg gets that Creighton job. And what does Jamie do? He goes and hires this guy with no head coaching experience ever from the NBA. His name is Fred Hoiberg.
The mayor.
And the rest is history. Other than a couple of bad years under Steve Prohm, Iowa State basically has gone to the NCAA tournament ever since. Think about that.
That is crazy.
I think they've missed out. So Fred's first year and the last 2 years of Prohm, I think that's the only, because TJ's 3 for 3 and Fred didn't miss outside of that. And But you have to wonder if Dana Altman doesn't get the urge to go out to join Phil Knight in Oregon.
Right. What happens?
What happens to Iowa State men's basketball at that time? Does McDermott ever turn it around? And how long can Pollard wait to fire him based on that long-term contract?
Mm-hmm. I would love to know, like, Jamie's perspective in that situation. Was it like a giant, like, sigh of relief? Like, yes, this is what.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe
saying,
in my book that there's going to be an entire chapter on
maybe
that.
you should. Maybe you should ask.
But yeah, but like I remember Jamie's response. He's like, "This is great for everybody. Like this is," and he was happy for Greg. Like the thing about it is, there's really nobody who's in the business that thought Greg is a bad coach.
Yeah,
it was just a bad fit.
Yeah,
he went from coaching these, farm kids at Northern Iowa to try and, bringing in guys from all over the country and like just trying to mesh. And Greg's really good at coaching at that time, that Missouri Valley type of player where it's less about athleticism, more about fundamentals and, and then all of a sudden, and I almost say like Ott's kind of recruited too well because he starts just bringing in these crazy talented dudes who all want the ball. And Greg's system is very much distributing thing. And Greg's a brilliant coach. Like he was trying to do analytics and stuff back in the mid 2000s. And the players that they were bringing in were not right for that. It just didn't fit. And he goes back and the rest is history. He's one of the top 10 coaches in college basketball now at Creighton. And he's going to be one of the favorites to win the national championship this year. Right with our guy. Our guy is too.
When you were covering this, when it was announced that spot was open, did you know, like, did you already have in your brain, like, oh yeah, this is what's going to happen next?
The Hoiberg thing?
No. For Greg taking the job.
Well, yeah. So I actually remember I was at a wedding in Kansas City when all that started to happen. And my phone starts blowing up and it felt like if this is true, he's leaving.
Yeah.
Like there's no way this guy is going to stay at Iowa State. And I think by that point too, Greg was beaten down. Like the fans have been really hard on him. And because it's a proud basketball school at that time, right? Not to say, I don't know if I would call Iowa State a basketball school or what, but like at that time, it certainly was.
Yeah.
Like you hadn't had enough success in football people cared about football, but you're coming off of Floyd and Eustachy where people were expecting to compete for conference championships. And then you're just in the tank. Not only that, it was a boring style. Like it was slow. It was, it's just bad. And so you knew he would try and get out. I remember, the question was, as far as replacing him goes, Fred was a guy who was fans always want one of their own back, especially Iowa State fans. They always do. If Dresser would ever leave and those guys, let's say they go off and get a job, they'd be like, oh, Bono, or, like these guys who in the wrestling. But the Fred thing really did come out of nowhere. Another just massive move by Jamie that was bold that I don't think most athletic directors get. The one thing I think that Jamie's biggest strength at Iowa State is that his knowledge of the fan base.
Yeah.
And I think he saw the Eustachy deal really tore the fan base to pieces.
Yeah.
If you look back at it and be honest, and it was ugly. And Morgan, man, it's a whole other podcast, the Wayne Morgan era. Ton of talent, but they were the worst coach teams I've ever seen in my life. And it was very evident. It was really underachieved based on the talent that Wayne had. And then really no success under McDermott. And I think Jamie's goal was to bring everybody together. And I know he leaned on Gary Thompson at that time, the Rolling Rocket. And that's what Fred did. And then Fred makes another bold move, and that's to hold on to this young guy named TJ Otzelberger and make him his associate head coach, who, in the eyes of most fans, well, why are you doing that? This guy's been a part of the McDermott thing, and he sucked. They haven't done anything. Holds on to him, and Fred and TJ get together on day one, and they cook up this scheme to invite all these transfers to Iowa State. And certainly somebody would have done it before them, but I would make the argument that those two guys changed the face of college basketball when they brought in that massive transfer. We had seen transfers,
Right.
not to the level where you're bringing in 4 at a time, like Iowa State was.
What's it like covering that type of transition? Like how does it, because were you full on covering basketball at this time?
Yeah, I was full time. I was back up and started Cyclone. We had started the new look of Cyclone Fanatic by then. It was wild. I remember I've told this story. I remember on my honeymoon interviewing Royce White on the beach in Sanibel Island, sitting there with my laptop and my digital voice recorder.
Ashley.
Well, she probably was relieved because I didn't have to hang out with her at that point. I remember that Chris Babb and Royce White both committed on my honeymoon. It was just nonstop because those guys, like the TJ's pace of recruiting back then was just out of this world. And I felt like you finally had a guy, not finally, McDermott was a CEO. You let your assistants do their thing. Fred was very hands-on in recruiting early on.
Yeah.
I think that definitely trickled off the longer he was at Iowa State. But at the time, he was on every call, and those two were inseparable. And yeah, it just felt like the Fred deal was just weird. Everybody was excited about it. There was some skepticism, which I think is fair. But the fans were just so excited. Everybody loved Fred Hoiberg.
Right.
You'd have to be a cold-blooded communist to not love Fred Hoiberg in 2010. And it was fun. Like, even Fred's first year where they weren't very good, they were competitive and they played hard. But, like, nobody really cared because they knew, oh, you got Royce White, Chris Babb, all these guys sitting on the bench. And we know how good they're going to be in a year. And they, to their point, to their credit, they knocked it out of the park. I mean, I think they make the NCAA tournament. It was like an 8 or a 9 seed. They blow out UConn. And then they lost to Kentucky and the number 1 team in the country and Anthony Davis. But it was still just a blast. And then they're bringing in more transfers. And it was kind of like every other day, it's like a different Christmas present you get to unwrap. And it was fun for me. And I learned so much because you're at the front lines of watching the sport change. Because again, when I started doing this, transfers were just, there were some, but it was like, well, my mom has cancer and I need to get closer to home.
Yeah.
It wasn't just, I'm not playing enough, screw you. Like it is now, like these players can leave for whatever reason they want. And that's fine. But it was just, you're watching it change so close up.
I feel like that could be its own podcast, honestly. But like, what year, at what time do you think that it truly it changed? Like the transfer portal truly changed?
Later than Fred, because I don't think Fred would have gotten half the players he did
And
later
today's
on.
claim.
Yeah, there's no way. Those guys aren't going to Iowa State.
Yeah.
And he was kind of taking guys with a little bit of a checkered past. Like none of them were like bad humans, but it was like, oh, well, Corey Lucius is a bad teammate, or Royce had criminal stuff with his.
Yeah.
But it was also a dude where undeniable talent, and it was his second chance. It wasn't like his 4th or his 5th chance. Like young people, I believe, deserve second chances, and they thought they could rein him in, and they did. I would say it was 5 or 6 years after Fred got there, and you started to see it too. I mean, they were still getting transfers, the late ones like the Deontay Burtons, and they were still getting them, but not nearly to the amount that they were. And these are high major transfers. You look at the guys now, it's mostly like they're coming up a level. It's like the St. Bonaventure guys. They were getting transfers from Big East schools, from Big Ten schools. They got 2 from Michigan State, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
Right. So 5 or 6 years later, and then really, I think social media galvanized the player power as much as anything did, because nobody really talked about it. It was just kind of that, and the thing that too, Jackie, when I started doing this, like Iowa State's media rights were like, they're getting like $5 million a year in media rights. It's like 50 now.
Yeah.
So there's just not as much like when you start paying coordinators $3 million a year, if I'm the quarterback and I'm not getting anything, now I'm going to start to look around. And that was when really things started to take off. Right around 2010, when these new media deals started to come, that was what started the transfer portal thing and the NIL deal. But it probably wasn't until 16, 17 when it really started to ramp up.
Yeah. It's crazy. Things have changed so much.
Money. Always follow the money.
Which I guess, again, good segue.
Yeah.
Conference realignment, particularly part 1. Tell me about it.
Well, so they're all important in their own ways.
Right. What's part 1?
Part 1 is the infamous Big 12 missile crisis of 2010.
Okay.
And this is, I just kicked the camera. I apologize. This is when, I'll never forget, it starts. It's just funny how you can remember exactly where you were, what you were doing when certain things happen.
Right.
And this is how I am with Iowa State sporting events. No, I remember this. I think it was Cafe Milo at Iowa State up in Ames when the Big Ten's commissioner, Jim Delaney, announces that he was going to explore expansion. And I didn't know what the hell that meant.
Yeah.
But the old timers at the time did, and they knew how seriously that we should probably all be taking it. And immediately the Big 12 is so the Big 12, you have to know the history of the league to know that it was never built to last.
Okay.
Like it was misfits. You know, the Big 8 was this iconic conference from the 70s. But the problem was there's this thing that happened in 1985 where the Supreme Court basically said that these conferences and schools could start selling their own media rights, that the NCAA didn't own them. Okay. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So the NCAA doesn't own everything. You guys can go off and sell your own.
Yep.
Well, what happened then was that all of a sudden, how many people watching your games on TV mattered. So the Big 8, when you look around, it's Kansas, Kansas State, Missouri, Iowa State, Oklahoma school. They didn't have TV eyeballs. They had these great brands, but they weren't in these high population areas. Well, in the meantime, you've got the Southwestern Conference that's down in Texas with all these Texas schools. It's Baylor, Texas Tech. Rice was a part of it. And it was a marriage of convenience. It wasn't, oh, we are in love. It was, oh man, we're having a baby. I guess we probably should do this together.
Yeah.
That type of a marriage between the two. And you have this immediate jealousy because Nebraska is like the number 1 program in college football at the time. Texas thinks it should be. Also at the time, it's important to note that the Big 12 doesn't distribute its financials evenly.
Okay.
So if Texas and Nebraska are on ABC and ESPN more than Iowa State, which they always were, there were years Texas would make $15 million a year and Iowa State would make $3 million. So you have this uneven distribution, and that leads to people not liking one another, essentially. Texas and Nebraska are always at each other's throats, and it starts to get very unstable. Long story short, Nebraska is the second domino to fall. It was Colorado that goes to the Pac-12 first. They think that this is a good opportunity for us to, be in with the elites of the West Coast, the academics, right? All that stuff matters. So then Nebraska accepts an invitation to the Big Ten, the richest conference in the world at the time. The Big 12 missile crisis, in my opinion, starts when Texas, Oklahoma State, and Texas Tech are at the table with the Pac-12 and their former commissioner, Larry Scott. The Pac-12 is seriously looking to going to 16 schools. They want to bring those schools in. Had that happened, and from what I understand, it was down to the final gun.
Okay.
Had that happened, despite anything we've talked about today, I believe Iowa State would be in a mid-major league. I don't believe Iowa State would be in a high major league right now because it would have completely stalled out all of the growth that we've seen during modern. When I say modern day, I always say 2000 on is how I think. But all that stuff is gone because you're looking at like a weird Big East. You're looking at the Mid-American Conference. You're looking at like what the American Conference is now. You're even looking at potentially having to play in the Mountain West.
Yeah.
Like you think of the economic destruction in the city of Ames. Think of enrollment dropping off in the university. I remember those times. I had coaches reaching out to me at Iowa State asking me what I knew was going to happen because they can't recruit when all this is going on. It's like a week, 2-week span.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually what happens is ESPN comes in and they say, we want to save the Big 12 for TV purposes only.
Mm-hmm.
So ESPN gives the Longhorn Network to Texas, who, at this point has more power than ever. But the missile crisis part 1, that saves Iowa State athletics as we know it.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing else matters that we've talked about today if Texas decides it's going to the Pac-12 at that point in time.
Okay.
And it was a highly, highly stressful moment for everybody.
Yeah.
And I remember like sitting in my apartment, just gotten married. Well, this was a stupid move. I just left this really good job. You start this Iowa State blog. Like, will people do this if we're in the Mid-American Conference?
Right.
And really lucky that Texas decided to stay at the time. That's why I've always had a little bit of a soft spot for Texas. And I know that a lot of people don't, and I get it. But like, they saved Iowa State's ass. If they hadn't decided to stick around back then, Iowa State would have been in a really bad spot.
In comparison to the realignment we just went through here in the last few years, what was it like covering it for the first time?
Well, you will laugh at this. My anxiety, I was obsessed with it. I was obsessed with it.
I'm not surprised.
It's all I did.
Mm-hmm.
Was just call people and get on message boards and read what I could find. And like you were just so worried not only about your future, but the institution that I attended, and my wife was still a student there. And you just, I remember the exhale when it didn't happen, just for all the business owners. And I remember Iowa State had a press conference. Gregory Joffrey, the old president of
Mm-hmm.
Iowa State, had a press conference that day and just talked about the future of the Big 12. And it was really earth-shattering stuff for everybody. And there was a lot of just a lot of angst is the best way that I could put it. It was not fun. There was nothing. But what that did is it instilled in me at a young age like a keen interest in all this type of stuff.
Yeah.
Very interested in it. And I'm probably more passionate about that than I am the game sometimes, just like where all this is going. But I'm just a media geek more so than a sports geek.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was terrifying, and I didn't sleep much, put it that way.
Well, I'm sure it was also kind of, I don't even know if nice is the word, but you didn't have kids.
No, you're right. It's all I did. And Ashley was in vet school. I do think too, I could make an argument that, boy, it really hurt the coaches.
Yeah.
Who were there at the time. Like, I mean, Paul Rhodes maybe doesn't get fired if it weren't for that. Because they couldn't recruit.
Yeah.
You look at Bill Finley's, he has been good for 30 years. Had a little dip right around there.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, it was a hard time. And the one sport that really didn't was men's basketball. But, I like to think it was more because of Fred and TJ's.
Yeah.
They were kind of isolated from it.
Mm-hmm. I feel like that type of stuff is what it like drives you. Just watching like just the chaotic process of when Texas and Oklahoma made their announcement and shit was just hitting the fan left and right. I felt like even though it was like burning you out and grinding you, it was still like it's your bread and butter.
It is. Yeah, I'm sick.
Yeah. Like
I love when politics and like the markets meet sports. But it's a lot more fun when I don't think Iowa State's going to get a nuke dropped on it too, right? Like that makes it a lot more fun. But I also like, it gives me sympathy for Oregon State and Washington State, right?
Yeah.
Corvallis is an awesome town. I've been there, called a basketball game there once. I don't want that town to be in ruins because of a conference realignment thing. So no, that's the one topic where it's like I can be busy with anything and I will drop anything.
Yeah.
To get in on these media and it's just I've been around for a long time now, so I know a lot of people at the networks.
Yeah.
Which so I can get it like from their side, and then okay, what's going on over here at the conference? What's the conference think? And then they'll give me their take. I'm like, oh, that doesn't add up. It's fun to put those pieces of the puzzle together and then pass them on to our audience.
Mm-hmm. So then, with that being one of your favorite things to do, cover, what about the modern day Big 12 and just the future of it? What makes that make the list?
Well, mainly because it just solidifies things, right? Like, so the reason I think that this league will work in whatever it's going to become is because you have all these schools that have been told for 15, 20 years that, we don't want you.
Mm-hmm.
In the past, it's always been like, well, these schools are looking to get out. This isn't sustainable.
Yeah.
These guys can go over there if they want. Maybe there'll be a little bit of that in this new Big 12, but I just don't think so. I think that I think that this is like the core building block of the third big conference. Mm-hmm. It's not going to be the same. But this to me, so if modern day Iowa State is 2000 till, let's say 2024,
mm-hmm.
this is a new era, in my opinion, because it puts Iowa State at a level. Iowa State can compete with Kansas and Kansas State when it comes to resources and fans, and Iowa State can never compete with Texas when it comes to that.
Yeah.
They just can't. It's a reality. There's not enough fans. There's not enough rich people. Well, I mean, is Iowa State in this new Big 12 number one? Hell no. Baylor has a lot more money. Texas Tech has a lot more money. Is Iowa State number 16? Absolutely not. You're right there in the middle, and you can punch at your own weight class. And to me, that's exciting about where they're going. Now, a lot has to happen, and there's going to be a lot of stuff that happens that you can't necessarily control. But to me, you've put yourself in a spot over the last 20 years where you can sustain success in this new era. And that's what I like about this new conference. And I hope it can compete at the level that I think it should be able to compete at, because I think it could be really fun. The problem will be, and I'm promising y'all it's going to happen this fall, like the college football playoff committees are not going to take this league seriously.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not. And you're going to get treated like you're a mid-major when it comes to that point. Try and make the playoff, but it's also really fun to try and go 9-3 and have good years. And it shouldn't all be about that.
Yeah.
And I don't think it will be. But I'd rather go 9-3, 8-4 every year than 6-6 and 4-8, and then trying to win the Big 12 North. To me, this is a more fun setup. You still you're making enough money where you can pay good coaches, you can pay the players. Everybody's on solid ground for the most part. There's obvious financial challenges coming up with these court cases and all that. But I really enjoy looking ahead to what I think is a really good league for Iowa State. This is better. This is about as good of a scenario as Iowa State could be in. Sans getting picked up by the Big 10 5 years ago, but that was realistically never going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Not enough eyeballs in this state.
Yeah, I definitely feel like people in general and media and just everyone in general feels way more relaxed about where things ended up than maybe where everybody felt.
No, I mean,
a year ago.
The chances of, so I think the ACC is going to implode at some point.
Mm-hmm.
If you would have said 10 years ago, there's going to be 3 conferences left from the Power 5 and the Big 12 will be one of them, nobody would have bought that. No, I mean, hell, when Texas and Oklahoma left, they did that alliance thing. They left the Big 12 out of it. Remember that?
Yeah. That felt like a bomb drop.
Yeah. It did. It looked really bad.
Yeah.
And I think they'll be the third. I think they'll be the third league. I really do. I think Iowa State's got a spot for the foreseeable future, which is awesome.
Yeah. It is nice to see that Iowa State didn't really get the crap end of it, because I was scared. I was genuinely scared there for a second.
Absolutely. And you should have been.
Yeah.
Well, I'll keep on keeping on with these business. These are fun.
yeah, I think it's nice to look back at all the things that you've been able to cover.
It makes me feel old too, but it's also fun because it's like I finally feel like I have the perspective just to give like an educated opinion. At the time,
Yeah.
I thought I did, but I didn't. This is a good trip down memory lane, and invite people. We'll be back in a couple weeks to do another one of these, and we're always looking for businessy type of topics with our friends from the Ivy College of Business. So tweet at us or leave a message on the forum, anything like that. If you guys have any ideas, how about that?
Yeah, I love it. Highly
Thank you.
encourage it. Well, thanks, Chris. I appreciate you
Appreciate
as
you.
always. And yeah, thanks for listening, guys. We'll be back.